The New California Republic, or NCR, is a faction in the computer role-playing game Fallout New Vegas. The most common representative of the NCR that a player will likely encounter is the NCR Trooper. A trooper, even on the New Vegas Strip, will usually be seen in fatigues, body armor, and of course, a helmet like this. In this video, I will demonstrate how I created a copy of the NCR helmet. If you decide to make one, be sure to understand the safe use of the tools, chemicals, yes, I did say chemicals, that I use here. The first time I encountered a trooper in the game, it occurred to me that this helmet had a familiar look. In the 1950s and 60s, there was an organization called the Office of Civil Defense. As a civil defense member, my father was issued a badge, a belt, a billy club, and this helmet. I don't know this to be a fact, but in keeping with Fallout's retro theme, I have to believe that the Trooper helmet was at least inspired by this civil defense helmet. A look at the details of the NCR helmet shows there's a band around the base of the crown where it meets the brim. The brim gets wider at the back. The helmet appears to be covered with an olive drab colored cloth that is made in 6 sections. This project required some basic sewing tools and some optional tools as well, like a pop riveter and a drill. The optional tools were needed to add a chin strap. Most of the bill of material items will be found at a fabric store and a home center. When picking out a piece of cloth, I made sure to pick a lightweight muslin. Heavier canvases and ducks can be difficult to work with. These consumables were needed to create patterns and for finishing the cover. The cover is finished using an oilcloth technique that dates back hundreds of years, but it works perfectly fine today. I used a commercial safety helmet as a starting point. This helmet was purchased at Lowe's for $15. On the good side, it possesses most of the features found on the Trooper's helmet from the game. On the bad side, the helmet has prominent ridges that were added for strength, but will ruin the smooth contour that's seen in the original. A workaround will be needed to maintain the smooth look. The helmet and cover are three-dimensional. The paper and cloth are two-dimensional. The trick is to create a pattern that, when assembled, will create the proper three-dimensional shape. The pattern must be made to conform to the shape of the helmet. Before starting, remove the head basket from inside the helmet. It should snap in and out of place easily. Trace around the outside of the helmet on a large enough piece of paper. Be sure to leave 3 or 4 inches of paper around the outside of the tracing. It will be needed later. Use a ruler to measure the depth of the brim at various points around the helmet. An exact measurement isn't necessary. Adjustments can be made later. We're just looking for an average. Find the center of the tracing. Draw a line radiating from the center to the edge of the paper. Remember the measurement for the width of the brim? From the trace line, measure that far in and make a tick mark. Make a similar tick mark 3 or 4 inches on the outside of the trace line. Continue making radial lines and tick marks until they cover the entire 360 degrees of the tracing. To create the outside edge of this pattern piece, connect each outside tick mark with a line. You can use a ruler or freehand. The same process is used for the inside edge of the pattern. If you don't already know this, this method is similar to creating a regression line while graphing mathematical functions, such as in statistics. Cut around the regression line. When finished, you should have a donut-shaped piece of paper that easily fits over the dome of the helmet. Measure the circumference of the helmet where the brim meets the dome. With a piece of paper at least this big, create a tube that will fit over the helmet. Tape the tube seam and tape the tube to the brim pattern piece. You'll need to do some math to divide the circumference by 6. In my case, the circumference is 28.5 inches, which works out to 4 3/4 inches when divided up. Draw a vertical line at each sixth. Draw a horizontal line around the pattern, about 1 inch from where the tube meets the brim. This shows as a dotted line in the illustration. The next step is to cut along the vertical lines down to the horizontal or dotted line. Fold one of the 6 pieces over the center of the crown. Fold the piece next to this first piece over the crown. Then, on the other side of the first piece, fold that piece over the crown. Trace around the 2 outer pieces to create and capture the 3-dimensional contour of the helmet on paper. Repeat this for all 6 patterned pieces. Carefully remove the pattern from the helmet and cut each piece out along the lines you drew. You should have 6 roughly bell-shaped pieces. As you cut each piece, make sure that you number it. The pattern must be assembled in the proper order or it will not fit properly when finished. The paper pieces that we've made so far are the exact size of the helmet. This doesn't leave any room for sewing the pieces together. Extra material added to a pattern piece is called a seam allowance. The seam allowance can be added when marking up the material, or you can create a new pattern piece with a seam allowance built in. If you decide to create a pattern piece with the seam allowance, be sure to number them with the same numbers as the original. You can pin the pattern pieces directly to the cloth and cut around them, or you can trace the patterns onto the cloth using a pencil or chalk. Either way, don't forget to number the pieces of cloth. I chose to trace the pattern pieces directly on the cloth. After marking and numbering, cut out each piece. You can't see them in this picture, but each piece of cloth is numbered. I drew the seam allowance on the cloth. It helps me keep the pieces aligned when sewing them together. Hand or machine stitch each numbered piece together. A lumpy seam will show. Seams need to be ironed flat. As each new piece is sewn on, use an iron to press the seams open. I have now created a 3-dimensional shape from 2-dimensional pieces of cloth. The hat band on the original appears to be made from 2 strips of cloth, one slightly wider than the other. I have yards of twill tape available to me, so I decided to use that for the narrow band. That meant I had to make the wider band. I did so as follows. If you don't have twill tape available, you could just as easily make 2 bands using this same technique. Top stitching may be done by hand or on a machine. Recall that the helmet has ribs and other bumps and dips. Since the cover should be smooth, I added a layer of 1/4 inch quilt batting to the helmet. It's held in place with tape that will hold it in place while I stitch it to conform to the shape of the helmet. When finished, the cover will be held in place by a band of elastic. The best way to add elastic is by using a casing. A casing is made by folding over and sewing the edge of the cover, leaving a channel, or case, to run the elastic through. Think of the cloth taut and a pair of sweatpants. The elastic will need to be threaded through the casing. You'll have to cut a small opening in the casing. Do so where it won't show. Use this trick. Attach the elastic to a small safety pin. It's much easier to pull and push a closed safety pin through the casing than it would be with just a piece of elastic. The cloth cover could be dyed to the proper color, but I decided instead to use a method that would have been well known to our ancestors, that is, making oilcloth. To start with, the material must be sized. That simply means that we need to prepare it for oil by applying painter's gesso or sealing it with wallpaper paste. Using wallpaper paste, be sure to use the gluten-based formula. It's dirt cheap. I paid less than $2 for this box, and it works great. You will most likely only need a tablespoonful mixed into a cup of cold water to be able to do the whole helmet. The layer of quilt batting that I applied would take days to dry and would shrink if it got wet. This would defeat its purpose. On the other hand, I want the cloth cover to shrink and remain smooth. My solution was to place a plastic grocery sack over the helmet and batting, then place the cloth cover over that. Brush on the sizing. Get the cover good and soaked. Get the underside of the cover where the casing is too. The sizing should be dry in 24 hours. One side effect of the sizing is that the cloth will shrink to conform tightly to the helmet. The batting is helping keep the contours smooth. Size the material for the bands too. You may find it helpful to pin them to a scrap of wood to hold them in place while brushing the sizing on. Save the piece of wood. You will need it later. Traditional oilcloth was made with pigmented linseed oil. Oil-based paint is essentially the same, oil and pigment. Give the helmet a good coat of paint. One coat, with maybe some touch-ups, is all you will need. Don't forget the inside, and don't forget the hat band. The hat bands can be attached after the paint has completely dried. Start with the widest band first. Pin one end to the back of the hat, wrap it around, pull it tight, and add as many pins as needed to hold it in place. Whip stitch the band in place with a curved needle, and cut off any excess. Don't worry about how the stitching looks at this point. It will be covered up by the next band. Remove the cover from the helmet. Pin the end of the narrow band to the back of the helmet, and top stitch it to the wide band using a straight needle. If you painted the narrow band and the thread does not match the color, use a small brush to touch it up with the same color paint. You can sew right through the plastic bag, so don't worry about that, and don't remove it either. Put the cover back on the helmet. There is one last step in creating the oilcloth, and that is to seal the cover with a coat or two of linseed oil. Linseed oil right out of the can is too thick and will take weeks to dry. When I'm making Civil War reproduction oilcloth, I mix up a formula of 1 part oil and 2 parts mineral spirits. Mineral spirits is flammable, so follow the safety instructions on the package. In the old days, they would add a lead powder or paste called litharge to the mixture to speed up the drying process. The wasteland is a dangerous enough place without having the potential of lead poisoning. Instead, you can use a teaspoon of a chemical called Japan Dryer. Added to this mixture, Japan Dryer will speed up the drying time. You will find it at better hardware stores and home centers. If there are any dull spots after the oil dries, simply recoat that area again. The sheen will get dull after the oil fully cures in a couple of days. After the oil mixture dries in a few days, you can remove the cover from the helmet and cut away the plastic bag. Place the cover back on the helmet and reinstall the head basket, and you can be finished. Although I haven't seen it in the game, the original Civil Defense helmet had a chin strap, so as an option I added one. Let's see how it turned out. Well, what do you think? You can't argue with the Vault Boy seal of approval. Thank you for watching.